UX, UI, open source community, and how the two are currently not mixing well or could mix better. It has way too long of a title. Sorry. So first about me. I go by Liz. So hi, I'm Liz. I write Elizabeth everywhere so I confuse everybody. I am currently working at Boundless as a user experience designer, front-end UI. There's way too many titles that I don't know which one to put sometimes, and we'll explain that as we go on and why that's a confusing bit of who I am, is because there's not one title that can encompass me. I've been at Boundless a little over 6 months now, I believe, doing some great work. A lot of what I've been working on is still not out in the open source community yet, but hopefully soon. And we are hiring, so if anybody is looking to make a career move, stop by our booth. Okay, it's not going to work. So the talk is basically going to cover 3 areas. The first is to address some design principles and guidelines that anybody can use. They're very basic, but they're very easily forgotten. And I will admit I sometimes forget them and then have to go back after like a couple hours, a couple days work and go, no, I should have done it this way. Remember this rule or design principle. And then after that, we're going to talk about how a non-programmer feels in an open source environment and what that means for that open source environment. And then I'm going to play a little ABC jungle with you and explain why UX designers, developers, and all of that, there's not one little box that we all fit in. So everybody fits in a different box. I'm kind of stuck by the podium, so sorry, I usually run around. So the first part of the talk is about design and interaction principles. So these are what anybody that is currently developing anything can do. You just take a step back from what you're doing, and I think I have 6 of them in this talk, but they're there as a way of just, okay, if I'm not a designer, if I'm not a UX person, I don't have all these years training in human-computer interaction, what can I do as a developer? So the first one is from a quote from Steve Jobs, put it nicely, be simple. I don't know how many times, this is the one I break a lot, I will fully admit that I have to take a step back and go, just keep it simple, stupid. Keep it nice and simple. Users want to not have to dig through menu after menu, or they don't want to dig through and try to find where something is. If there's a way to direct them there easily, that is a great thing. However, saying that, it's simple. It's all right in front of them, right? There's a play in this because you say, okay, well, it's all there. It's simple. How do you find things? Well, you might not always want to keep it as simple as put it in front of them. Another issue that you might have when you're considering keeping it simple is there's a lot of interfaces. This is a redesign of an air traffic control center. Air traffic control pilots are the best other case for this, so a lot of airplanes, they need situational awareness. What they're doing is very critical, and if they make any mistake, it could crash a plane or other activities. So when you're redesigning for that, sometimes the best approach is not to redesign. Yes, it looks ugly. If you've ever seen a cockpit of a plane, I don't even know where to begin with the amount of controls that are in it. But if you change any of those, you could throw off the situational awareness of that pilot to the point where they will crash the plane because they couldn't find what it was. So I'm advocating that you keep it simple, but also know that some interfaces need to be complex. They might not need to be this complex with this many things for what you're doing, but sometimes they do need to be complex. So Google takes this to the extreme. They take the minimalistic approach. This is all you get when you go to google.com. And you think, oh, they're just being lazy, or oh, this. I mean, if you go back 10 years, you remember your Yahoos and everything. There was so much on the screen because the way you searched really was menu-driven. You would pick items and lists. Well, as Google has evolved, they've realized all we really need is a box and let people type in that box. And even the size of this box dictates what you type in it. So Google is allowing you to type a sentence, to ask a question, If it was a smaller box, they'd be dictating you type a word, type a few words. But because they actually give a long search box, they want you to type what is the best restaurant in Raleigh, North Carolina? They don't want you to just put restaurant North Carolina, but they'll accept both. Another interface that really is simple, but it's been adapted to be simple, is a desktop interface. Any desktop interface, let me see here, late 80s, early 90s, desktop interface was unheard of. Everybody had the command prompt and your DOS or whatever. This was a big step. And to get people's mental abilities, to get them to be like, oh, it's a desktop, I can drag things on a desktop like I can at my office, cut and paste. All of that was revolutionary back in its time. The people that invented cut and paste had debates for years in academia if it should be called cut and paste. And today, we just go, what do you mean it should be called something else? That's cut and paste. So simple means a lot of different things, but do remember, keep it simple. The next one is consistency, grouping, and familiarity. And let me rush back here. And wrong way. Spoiling my talk. So this, as much as I am going to pick on this interface, and sorry if anybody made the bulk renamer tool, I'll apologize many times after if that's the case. They did group things. You can see that numbering, auto, add is all grouped here. So they did follow the second design principle I had, but they forgot the first one. So it's still not working as an interface. So for grouping, consistency, familiarity, Jacob Nielsen did this quote, but it's all about consistency. So if back to the cut and paste talk, if you started calling it something else, everyone would be like, what is that? What do you mean by that? Or if we replaced the save icon that is now so outdated because everybody's like, what's a 3.5 disk? But that's what we use because we know it. It's consistent. It's what people are expecting. And this goes in a lot of different designs. It can go as simply as making sure when you're taking a date that you always take the same date. Make sure your interface always goes and says, this is the way I'm going to format my date. Make sure every developer that's working on it understands this so that it's all one date. And especially when time is involved, make sure you're all talking the same time zone as well. Especially in databases, if you're recording a time zone and you have a couple developers in different ones, I've seen time just have to be thrown out because nobody can tell you what time it was actually recorded in because they forget that there's multiple time zones. Next thing is consistency. So Microsoft actually did this really well. They decided that each one of their products for Office was going to have the same ribbon effect. We may or may not like ribbons, depending on when you liked Microsoft, but they did. Every home has where your paste is. You can do page layout on almost all of them. It's very consistent across their applications. They stayed consistent within one, but they also stayed consistent throughout. The next one is we're all in GIS, is kind of difficult for us. How are we able to be accessible and usable to everyone? And the most important thing here is we like to think that we are, but a lot of how we approach things is not accessible to people with some disabilities. The one I'm going to cover is colorblindness, because there's so many people with some form of colorblindness in society that they will not be able to, if they're red, blind, colorblind, they do not see any difference between these red and green circles. But it's not even just for that. People use different things and look different ways. So the fact that we are only representing things by reds and greens and circles means we're losing some opportunity. So what we want to do is use something in addition to color. So here you can see some of them are better than others. For the yellow icon, they have the explanation point in it. They have the folders. So this is getting halfway there, where they're saying, okay, we're making some way of going more than one color. So specifically for maps, Most people would say, oh, that's great, right? Everybody can tell the difference between these reds and blues. But if you have any contrast on your monitor problems, some color vision problems, these look alike. There is no contrast in either of these. If anybody's following any of the political stuff and you watch any of the maps they're putting in place with all the reds and all the blues, I can't tell you who's who half the time watching that. Like, use different colors. And another way of doing it is to use hashing. So instead of including the different colors, now they're going to hash them to mean even more. But that's another way of adding color plus something. And then I have 3 here that kind of go together. So user-focused. So we all talk about this magical user. Who are they? In open source, we are them, right? We're our users. We're our programmers, we're developers, we're our users. So stay user-focused, but understand that the user doesn't always have to be right. You just have to work with the user so that they understand that some things might be better for them than what they're asking. We're not running a mom and pop shop where the user has to be right, but you do have to understand your users, engage your users, and be with your users. Interaction-based. Everything we do is interaction-based. We're developing software. You interact with that software. So when you're interacting with that software, make sure the interactions are consistent, are simple, are everything else. The interactions are as important as the design features within them. I can have this nice, consistent, well-colored application, but if I think nothing about how they're going to interact with it, it's a pretty picture on a screen. And then finally, for the design recommendations, is everything is communication. If you put anything on the screen, any kind of interaction, you are communicating something to those users. It may be that you want them to go this way, go that way. It is something there that you are communicating. So just, even if it's the way you do the logo communicates something. The way you do save, it's communicating something. And for all of these, really it's for users and everything, it's driven by what user requirements go, then we design for those user requirements. And this is just one of the many versions of this that you can find about what people all think they're getting. So this takes communication to one step further. You have to keep engaging with that user. Just don't take the system requirements that they give you and go and program the entire time and then come back with a finished product. Engage them at every level, or you might get any of these except the tire swing is what they really wanted. So, how do we get feedback and interaction from non-programmers? Most open software uses Git, right? GitHub. It's where it's all at. You tell somebody that's not a programmer to get to GitHub, they're going to look at you Bambi-eyed and go, what are you talking about? I need to use GitHub. How do I even begin this process? And then you have to then you're telling me you have to install this on some command line? What do you mean? So for engaging the users, you have to do more than just GitHub. It can't be just available for them to go and get. And these are even developers, UX people. If you want these people in your community, you have to give them an easy way of getting to their community. Hate to say it, but loading bars and a graphical user interface for installing your app is what everybody expects nowadays. They don't want to go and run Vagrant up in a command line and try to figure out, okay, did it install? Did I get everything? This makes people happy and makes them feel like something's happening as opposed to text on a screen. The other thing is have a place where they can download the application that's not GitHub. Even though your main repository is in GitHub, and it does say fork on GitHub up there, you have a place where they can pretend that GitHub isn't existing because it's too complex for them. So have it where they can download right there. Also, as much as we love to track all our issues in GitHub, report it, do a pull request, give us all this information. If you're not a programmer, pulls, pushes, clones, that's a foreign language to you. So have somewhere where they can interact with what would look like a help desk to them. somewhere on a web that they can just go and open issues, tell you about things that are going wrong in what they're seeing. These might seem very obvious, but there's a lot of people I've talked to that are like, oh, I really wish I could help out with this, but I don't get GitHub. GitHub is very new to me. I don't even know where to begin. Where if they had the web page and then found this would be their way of beginning and touching programming and open source a little lightly. Any questions so far? Okay. So the last bit of this is everybody wants UX UI. It's what everybody's like, oh, we got to do a user experience. We got to get this to be great. We got to get this one person to do all of this. This field is not one person or one skill set. It is a ton of skill sets that is all being mashed together. So you have your sound designers, your visual designers, your architects, your information architects, your human factors people, your human-computer interaction. How many people know what each of these fields are? Can anybody say they know at least 90% of them? I've got one hand in the room. It is just that complex anymore on who is calling themselves a UX, a UI person, and what they actually mean by that varies on who you're talking to. One of the best diagrams I've seen recently is trying to break down the process of UX UI. And it starts with user research, and then the information design, interaction design, visual design. Then you do a front end, then you do a back end, and then you have some kind of technology. Mind you, this is not linear. As much as it's drawn linear, it's just a way of presenting it. But notice all these bubbles. These are all different people with different skill sets. You can find people that have multiple of the bubbles, but it's very, very likely that they're going to have a strength in one of these and a little bit here, and I might have dabbed here. So when you're looking for these UX, UI people, take this into consideration. There are, and these terms all get interchanged and used differently. So I would honestly say if you're looking for somebody, make sure you are very explicit on what you are actually requiring them to do. So a lot of the confusion gets in, well, I want a graphic designer that can code. Those are two really different degrees, and really they're starting to mesh, but a lot of people are either very good at graphic design and give you print layouts and what a website should look like, but they are not the people that are going to be your front-end developers that can actually implement that. It's very rare to find a person with both of those strengths. It's easier to find an information designer that might know some front-end, or a back-end, front-end person that knows a little development or a little design. But I have yet to find the unicorn that can cover this entire spectrum of people. So, what does this mean for open source? Well, how do we get contributions to our open source communities? Anyone? Somebody submits a pull request, right? And explains what they want to do, how they want to do it, and they're affecting the code base. Well, how then do we take products of user design? This is one of the products. It's a wireframe. So somebody sat here and sketched out maybe what a front end should look like. How do I put this into GitHub? How do I, if even the person that's designed this knows to go to GitHub, how would this be received? So we need some way of talking. These people are all, if they're in school, recently graduated, they're all looking for an outlet to build their portfolios. They want to join open source communities to do that. But unless the open source community is known to them, which very few open source communities are, except if they're with universities, they don't know how to go and engage the people, because they're like, well, I can't do a pull request. I'm not coding this. I'm just recommending a design for this or a change for this. The other thing that's an output of UX, UI design is scenarios. So what a lot of people really like to focus on in this area is who are my users? Let me go and let me make these users more practical to the developers, to the people. And so what they do is they do a lot of interviewing, a lot of overviewing of who is my community, and then they make these personas of these are the qualities of the different types of users you have. So if these are the types of users you have, these are the features and requirements that you might want to cater towards. As we are all users of our software, we like to cater towards ourselves, which are probably the expert user. But there's all these other users that are there, which these scenarios and these the UX people specifically can help you build out these scenarios so that you're aware of them. And then the last but not least of what UX, UI people will do that's not just coding is they do wireframes. And this is not the best interaction design. So what they're going to say is they're going to sit down with your software and go, okay, if I want to purchase something, I click here, I do this, I do this. And what they're looking for is a way to improve that flow. They're first going to map it out, and then they're going to try to improve that flow so that the different scenarios that they put together in personas match that flow better. So that something that is always used, it's 100%, but it's 14 menu items down, it's going to get missed a lot by a basic user. So maybe bringing that to the forefront is what that's for. And that is all I really have. So questions? I've played every role except backend in that diagram, so I can answer any questions anybody has on everything probably.
One thing I have a real difficulty is all the different dependencies in open source.
Yes.
It is so very specific to each one of those components to get to the final end. And if you don't get them all right, forget it.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm really advocating for installers. And unfortunately, those installers have to be Mac or PC or a VM instance that is behind the scenes, because that's what non-programmers are using. So the dependency trackdown, you need to make that blind to your user. And it's very hard. I struggle with that myself, even though I have some development skills, is that what dependency do I need? What version of that dependency do I need? Oh, but I'm also working on this other project that has this other version requirement. So if I install them both, are they going to play nice? And this is an issue we all have to consider, is how much can we get our software to not take over the entire machine? So there, a lot of it's going into containerization right now, or VMs, where I'm not going to install this directly on your OS. I'm going to install this where it can be its own thing and updated and deleted as needed. Anything else?
Do you use any tools for doing mockups? You have that sketch up there. Would you have a favorite way to do those mockups?
There is a lot of different tools for mockups. Basilisk will give you very generic wireframes. OmniGraffle is a Mac-only product, but you can do some high-fidelity mockups in it for the people like me that really don't know Photoshop. A lot of people do Photoshop still. You can hand draw them. I don't know how many times I've whiteboarded a interface and then just took pictures of it. So it's how high fidelity you want them. And there is a slew of software to do it.
Do you have any practical tips for collecting user feedback and implementing it after design or an existing design?
Do you know your user base? Like if I said, could you email your users? Okay, because, well, so if it's a custom software for an organization, you can just go engage them because you know who's using it. So we implemented Project X in this department of this business. So you know exactly where to go find them. Open source is not anywhere close to that cleanly. So to engage your users, you might have to actually build into the interface a way of saying, give us feedback, report this. And if there's a button that says give us feedback, they're more likely to click on it and give you feedback, even more so than if you just have a email us if you have problems, because then it's going out of the software, coming back in. And if you do decide to do a button or something, try to capture the state of where they are, because the one thing with users that you really need to understand is they will tell you what they think they are doing. And they will be very adamant that this is what I did, exactly this. But if you sat there and watched them, which is great if you have the opportunity, they are doing something completely different than what they're telling you. They just don't know that they are.
What was the spelling on the software you mentioned earlier? Basilisk?
Oh. Hold on.
What was the next one?
Omnigraffle. So that is Basilisk, so B-A-L-S-A-M-I-Q. Balsamic. I always call it the wrong thing. There we go. I'm doing wonderful. Excuse me?
Like the vinegar.
Like the vinegar. This will give you very basic mock-ups. They look a little kiddish, but they do serve the point. So it's very sketchy, can add things. And then the other one is Omnigraffle. And Photoshop's used a lot. I've seen people mock up in PowerPoint. You basically use what you have and then expand as needed. As I said, if I had my choice, I would have completely written on a whiteboard this entire presentation. I just like whiteboards. Anything else?
What do you think that open source projects could do to sort of reduce the friction of getting more UX and design people involved in the upstream projects?
Somehow make it so they have a way of contributing that isn't GitHub. But in that as they're contributing, they also need a way of being able to access the software. Because installing the software of an open source project is a big hurdle in the engagement process for them. Because they're like, well, I installed it, it was 3 weeks ago, and you're like, we've already revisioned it 20 times. What do you mean you're giving us feedback on this? So it's just making it easier for those of us that aren't living and breathing by GitHub, and a way of communicating with everyone and seeing the work get implemented. Because I can give anybody a wireframe, and it's up to your interpretation. But there still needs to be that dialogue. Well, what did you mean by this? Well, what happens if there's this? Because any UX person isn't going to catch everything possible. So you need to engage them in a back and forth in a conversation like any other community would.
Do you think any part of that is like the communication tools? Because a lot of my friends who are sort of on the design side are really intimidated when I tell them join the mailing list or get in the chat room. It's an IRC, and they look at me like, oh, I'm working up in the 90s. So.
Yeah, and that is an issue. That is a big issue. People are adapting Slack, but some of my design friends as well are like, what's that? So you have to find a platform that you can engage them on comfortably. And it's a give and take for both. They need to understand that they're stepping into somebody else's territory that they're not familiar with. And the territory needs them to come in. It's got to be a give and take. If you made it too simple and, oh, we're just going to cater to this, you're going to lose the feedback you want, probably. Because you want them to go, I can't figure out this installer. This is what it really should look like. That's part of the UX UI's job, is to say, no, you're thinking about the expert programmer only. You need to do something else. So it's a give and take on how much you go into that communication pattern with. Anything else? Why, thank you.